All right, so welcome to Road Talk.
There we go.
I'm Jerrod. I'm filling in for Rocky today, who is on his sabbatical.
Yeah.
I think he's off treasure hunting in the Caribbean or something.
That might be it. So like every 7 years, you get a sabbatical if you're on ministerial staff. So
Yeah,
he got
so-
the month of March.
The month. So you guys are stuck with me for a month. So congratulations.
But it's basically the same car except for yours is black.
I know. I thought that. I was
pretty-
like, we do have similar cars. So
It's pretty impressive
Yeah.
that you guys planned that. Bought your cars a couple of years
We-
ago
yeah.
in line
I'm
with
just
this
trying to be
series.
cool like Rocky. That's all. I'm just
don't
following
know.
in his footsteps.
You could probably be as cool as Rocky, just not as attractive.
Well, that's a given.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
given.
I mean, that's what he tells me.
Yes.
So I think Rocky, I think I lived up to what my
He
requirements.
didn't pay you money to say that.
No,
did he?
no, but do I have requirements by contract
Okay.
to speak of his attractiveness?
So here's what, before we dive in, because we are talking about, this is the last week of our series, Divine Perspective.
Okay.
But before we dive in, I heard that we got some letters, some emails that maybe Rocky was a little too
Yeah.
hard on you the last time.
I've always thought
you were in
Rocky's
the
too
car.
hard on me, but apparently some other people finally saw it. Thank you so much, friends.
So I thought I would start. Let's start with a fun question,
Okay.
icebreaker question,
Okay.
just to to be fun
Yeah,
before we really
he made
grill
me
you.
sing.
Yeah, I won't be
Okay.
making you do that. So here's my question for you: what was your favorite childhood toy? Did you have a favorite toy as a kid? Something that like really nostalgic, memorable to you?
Jeez, man, if you're talking little, I mean, this sounds funny. One thing I really always liked were slinkies.
Oh no, that's
When I was
awesome.
little, and then I would say that basically really liked the Rubik's Cube, but what I was a thing called a whippet.
A whip
And
it,
I was
okay.
super good at this thing, and I could get it done in just like a matter of seconds. I've kind of wondered if I could
Okay.
order one online and try it and see if I still know.
I remember something like a skip it, but
Yeah,
this is different.
no, it's a little round thing, and it's black, and you'd move this thing, and
Yeah.
maybe some of the viewers today are aware of what a
Okay.
whippet is. But
Maybe.
but I really liked that. Because I was so good at it, and so you could kind of, and I'm a 3 in the Enneagram, which
Yeah.
means I want people to think highly of
Okay.
me, and so I could, when I would accomplish something, they're
Yes.
like, "Wow, you're impressive." And,
Yes.
that's like
Okay. Love it.
that's like crack to me.
So,
It's
yes.
like yes.
Your favorite toy is like something you can accomplish.
That's correct.
Show off.
No
I love
question.
It. I love it. I love slinkies too. I love the metal ones though. I don't even think
Yeah, oh,
they
yeah.
do
Oh,
that
yeah.
anymore.
Do
but
they don't?
used to- I don't know.
What is it?
It's all
that is-
plastic now,
Oh,
I
that's
think.
not a slinky.
I know. I'm with you. Yeah. But I would always get them all bent up, you
Right.
know, and then you're like, this is not good. But, okay, awesome.
Yeah.
I like your toys.
Okay, all right.
Those are good ones. Yeah, if you're watching, write in the comments your favorite toy from your childhood. Why not? But let's jump into the meat of this thing. So we're wrapping up this series. It's been about the life of Joseph,
Okay.
divine perspective. Before we just specifically talk about this week, what if you were gonna explain one takeaway, what you think is like the big takeaway from this whole series that you are hoping those that have been a part of this that really sinks in for them? What do you think is the big takeaway?
Well, I think that the big takeaway from the whole story of Joseph, if you read the kind of the biblical narrative, I think it's the sovereignty of God, or as our early church fathers would call this, the providence
Sure.
of God, and how he's doing things that we can't even see, things that we can't even feel, to set up not just us for success. I think that's a byproduct,
Yeah.
because I think ultimately all that are on his team will experience success, whether we feel it or not in this life. But I think that there's a great deal of opportunity that God is working things out in such a way as to bring about His glory and our good, and basically salvation history is kind of being written through our lives.
Yeah.
And God is doing great things for the kingdom in our lives, and whether we like the way that it feels or not.
So, and that's a good statement there, right? Whether we like the way it feels or not, especially thinking about this week's message and talking about ultimately it's God's story, right?
Right.
It's less about it's our story and way more about it's God's story.
Right.
I was even thinking as I'm hearing about the story of Joseph and just hearing about how God, can use our story, can use us. There's kind of this, I hear this a lot in Christian culture, but it also, I think, to those outside of Christian culture
Right.
can sound so derogatory. But I hear people be like, God, use me. And so when we talk about God using us,
Right.
It's kind of got good and bad connotations. So how do we navigate that? Like, how do you explain that to somebody that is a very off-putting statement that, yeah, God is going to use you?
Right. Well, I think that, first of all, we have to understand that all of creation is about the glory of God, and that you and I are being used in that story, but yet we are beneficiaries from that salvation story as well. So it's not as if God is using us in a negative way. And,
Sure.
and I don't know if this, you may have to cut this out, but I'm going to go ahead and say something
say
that
it.
might be a little bit inappropriate.
Okay.
But that sometimes I will make a joke with my wife about you're just using me for my body.
Okay.
Okay.
I wasn't sure where you're going there.
Yeah.
This is an okay level of
Okay, is it? Okay, I just wasn't sure, but
Sure.
but it's kind of a joke, right?
Yeah.
Because in reality, I'm grateful for the
Sure.
opportunity to engage in physical intimacy,
Sure.
and I'm saying, so I
That's
guess
the
in
joke,
yes.
you know,
So
that's
in
the
one
joke.
sense,
Yes.
I hope she doesn't watch this. Nonetheless, you understand. I guess what I'm saying is it's for our good as well.
Yes.
That
No,
we are,
okay.
yes, being used, but being used for our good.
Okay. No, that's good, because I think, again, and again, this is sort of even an illustration
Right.
with the message this week. I think we think in context of God's having this big chess game, right? And if we're just pawns in it, again, that sounds negative. Like, are we just being used by God for his means? And he's just, it almost gives the idea of this cruel God
Right.
that is just doing what he wants to do. And, who cares if we're the victim of it?
Yeah.
And certainly Joseph could have felt that way sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So I love what you're saying, and I think that's the thing. It's hard to wrap our heads around that when we're in the middle of a difficult season, to think, well, no, ultimately God using me is for my own good. Like, that's hard. Like, how do we reconcile with that when it doesn't feel like that's the case?
The first question is, did you think your life was going to last forever? Did you think that the story of you was going to continue to just echo for the next 5,000 years? And the answer is, definitively no. You're going to be lucky if people remember you 100 years later.
Yeah.
That's going to be a pretty substantial memory if that's the case. So because of this, it's important to join in to the anthem of the Lord's renown. I think oftentimes of like if you think of a football game, and you think of a football game where there's all these individuals that come together, and they're all wearing the same clothes, and they're the same color clothes, if you will, and they're all yelling the same chants and the same cheers. They're all singing the same anthem, but they're doing it for the glory of the team, and they love it.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Are you following the illustration
following.
here? So if you go down to Texas A&M, which they're great at this, but it's true probably all throughout the SEC, that it's clear. I mean, no one's like, "What? You're wearing the same thing as me? I'm not an individual."
Sure.
No, you're not an individual. You're a part of the chorus of the renown of Texas A&M University. And I hope some of you whooped when I said that. But I think,
get it. I was in high school. I was one of those guys. I painted my chest.
Okay.
And was there on the sidelines.
Yeah. Okay.
Cheering for the team, because
Right.
that's how much
Yeah.
school spirit I had. We were the Mighty Owls, and it was me and 3 other guys, and we spelled out owls.
I love it.
So
Well, right. And so once again, but at the end of the day, if the team wins the game, nobody's going, "God, Jerrod was awesome."
sure.
I mean, they're talking about the
might.
game.
No, you're right.
They're talking about the game. I mean, that doesn't mean that Jerrod's never mentioned,
Sure.
but Jerrod loved that experience, being part of that
Yes,
experience,
no.
because you had joined the anthem of the Owls.
Yes.
And I don't know, maybe that's how I...
No, it totally makes sense. And again, and I think I love this description, but of the idea of God's greater story, right? Like there's
Okay.
a greater story, and we all get to have a part in it, in that greater story. But when we get too fixated on like my story, right? And that was again,
Yeah.
that's kind of the idea of the message this week, right?
Right.
It's not all about my story. It's ultimately God's story, and even how my story, you know, the story God's
Right.
trying to tell may actually be about other people, right? I love
Right, yeah.
this. I don't know if this is a direct quote from the message, but the idea of nothing that happens to you is just for you. It may also be
Right.
for somebody else, right?
Yeah.
And so looking in that terminology changes everything.
There's a temptation to believe that my story intersects with God's story, and that's not really it at all. I'm running, parallel below the story of
Sure,
God,
sure.
and because of this, God is bringing all different kind of people in. He's providentially, that's the idea, right? That providentially He's causing things to happen, not just in your life, but in the life of someone else. And that's what's interesting in the story of Joseph. And I kind of made a big deal about this on Sunday. Judah's family would have disappeared if it was not for Joseph's provision.
It's true.
And that would have led to Jesus not being the Lion of Judah,
Sure.
which would have therefore negated the prophecy as to who he was, which would then therefore make him not the Messiah.
Yeah.
Think about that for a second.
Yeah. That's so good. And again, it's easy now, right? It's easy in hindsight to see that.
Right.
Because we can look at all of the promises of God and the scripture, but when you're in it, what's your advice to somebody who's in it to help them have that perspective to see the greater story?
Man, I would just say you have to get into the Word of God and see that God has always been faithful. Because truthfully, we can say, look at your life and see how He's been faithful. And certainly there are good examples of that. But our lives are not all equal. Some live more charmed lives than others. But when we look to the text, and I think this is why the Bible has enough stories of other people. I think we were talking about there's about 3,000 different names of people inside of the Bible. And I think that opens up the door for us to experience His goodness and to experience His providence in our life.
So do you think, like, what does that look like for David? What does that look like for you? Because again, and you may not feel this way,
Okay.
but there are other people sitting in the congregation and they're like, I'm just a dude. I'm just a person. I just attend church. I'm just trying to live my life. David, he's the pastor. He's one of our co-pastors.
Yeah.
He's like got a big role in the story of God. But I bet I have a feeling you don't even necessarily look at it that way,
Never.
right? Because as you're looking at the bigger story,
Yeah.
you're like, man, I've got a small role, but I'm happy to play it. So like, how do you navigate that for you? Like, what is that perspective like for your life?
I think that the way I would say it, and some of us were talking about this on Sunday, is that some extras in movies are more important or more prominent than other extras, but they're all extras.
Sure.
So you might see this extra a little more clearly than you see another one, but they still are just extras. Yeah. And
They might have had a line. They might have got to say one sentence,
Maybe, but I'm actually referring to, maybe a line, maybe not. But the point is, they're like the only people that are watching it for that particular extra is that person and the people closest to them. No one else notices the difference between guy number 3 and guy number 5. And so I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe you're a slightly bigger mouthpiece, but even then I'm not even sure in God's economy which is the most important.
Sure.
The idea that the speaker is more important than the person working in the nursery does not seem to be consistent with what we see in the Bible.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many times that I know you do this too. Like, you'll go out in nature, or you'll go look at the sky, or to think about space, right? Anytime you start to feel like you're some big shot or some big, part of life, it's just a reminder, like, how big is God? How massive is He? How massive is the story He's telling? Well, we can just look into space. We can look into the sky. We can look at the Grand Canyon, and be reminded of, like, the grandeur of how much bigger things are and how small we are.
I remember we had a church event, and afterwards, it was a Sunday morning, and I got there, and we had stuff all over the parking lot, and so it was really hot, and I just started picking up all of these things out of the parking lot, and I'm sweating. I've got pit sweat, and I'm just reaching down, picking up these bottles that people have drank out of, and these wrappers that have partial food in them, and I'm kind of disgusted by it. And I remember thinking to myself, boy, you've really hit the big time now, Griffin. This is what you went into ministry for. And I say that facetiously because I felt like I just got pressed in on by God that said, man, if this is what you're to do, then you're to do it.
Yeah.
And you're to do it to the glory of God, whatever that looks like.
That's good.
And so no matter how big your task may seem to others or to yourself, no matter how small it may seem to others or to yourself, you do it all to the glory of God, and you recognize that you have joined in that anthem. You're singing the praises of, our God.
Yeah, that's good. Has there been a moment in your life, specifically with that idea, maybe that something that has happened to you, something maybe awful, and it was less about what God was going to do for you in that thing, but what He did for somebody else through what happened, or like a hardship or a struggle? Like, have you experienced that in your life? Does anything come to mind? I guess.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Example?
One comes to mind that I shared Sunday, and once again, I don't want to get into all of it because I it's funny, is for a long time I was like, I don't want to be known for this, I don't want to be marked by this, but honestly, it's just part of my story. The sexual assault that I experienced over the course of some of my younger years of life, I've got to the place where I'm comfortable sharing that. And a few weeks ago, I even shared it on one of the campuses, and I had 3 different people that set up appointments with me to follow up to talk about what their story was.
Yeah.
And so it's been super helpful for these people to be able to get the chance to, hear someone that identifies with them, and to recognize that you don't have to live like the damaged goods that you feel like.
Sure.
And I've found that to be super helpful. And a lot of people have even, claimed to, talk to therapists about it, and to feel a comfort. Maybe they had a therapist, or maybe they went and got one, but it was super helpful for them.
Has that been redeeming for you? Like, has that helped you kind of cope through that circumstance in your life, seeing that happen?
Yeah, I think there's always an advantage when you get the opportunity to see God's redemptive work of something in your life that was tragic, or something in your life that was traumatic. And so, yes, it's been super helpful, and reminded me once again that as much as I hate that part of my story, it's a wonderful part of my story, because God is using it to basically bring about His glory and our good.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
I think it's so beautiful to see when that happens, when God does that. I think it always feels more beautiful on the other end of it.
Yeah, right.
Right? Not so much in the moment. That's funny. My wife may kill me for telling this story, but
we'll both be dead, because
we'll both be dead. We're both gonna get in trouble with our wives.
Yeah.
We're talking about some trees got cut down in our neighborhood. Anyway, she's been wanting us to plant some trees, but she was just talking about how she's like, she hates it because if we really plant a young tree, like, we probably won't even be alive to really enjoy it.
Right.
And so there's like a little bit of a resentment towards, like, the people we're really helping are probably going to be, you know, after the people that buy the house after us, or a generation after us, or whatever. And, that's a hard pill to swallow when it's like something negative happens to us, or we have to go through something, and it's going to benefit somebody else, you know? So
that's really good.
I don't know, what do you say to the person that's in it right now? They're in a situation that's so difficult, and maybe there's a little bit of resentment there of like, well, if God is just using this for somebody else in the future,
Right.
I'm having a hard time with that. Like, what do you say to that person?
Well, I just quote scripture. I do not consider our present sufferings worth comparing to the glory that awaits. And that there will come a day when God will make all things new. There will come a day in which God will redeem it, restore it, and reverse it. And that he will basically settle all accounts. And so if we just do what he puts in front of us, if we'll follow the Spirit wherever the Spirit sends us, that we would be able to experience a comfort in knowing that God is in control and that he's going to work all things out in the end.
That's good. Sometimes that's all you can do is just go back to scripture, right? When things feel out of control. I think there's probably a lot of people,
Right.
not even just personal circumstances, right? They just look at the world.
Right.
And they're
Right.
like, the world seems like it's,
Yeah.
on fire. So what do we do?
Right.
And I just think that's it. Go back to those truths. Go back to those scriptures. Just
Right. Hold to what you know is true, even when you can't see it, even when you can't feel it, because that's how God's going to redeem it and use it.
That's good. And that's kind of the theme of this whole series, right? That's kind of where we began and where we end, right?
Right.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being my hostage
Yeah.
in the car today
Love
for
it.
Road Talk. I appreciate you.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you.
And hopefully the CGs have some good conversation from it.
Hope so.